I'm Rena Saltzman, and I'm with Rehmann Marketing, and I am joined today with Ken Zimmer and Brian Young from our Rehmann Technology Solutions. Thank you guys for joining me today.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Hi, Rena.
We are going to be having a conversation for our Empowered Chats around core versus context. This is not a new concept. It's something that I think has been around for a while, but it's something that's coming to the surface quite a bit in a lot of business conversations as organizations are starting to pay more attention to their core business values and the core business items, and especially in these times of disruption. I mean, it's all around us, right? There's different threats going on. The businesses are suffering from supply chain. They're really taking a deeper look at what really makes up the core of their business. How can they survive? How can they thrive? And how can they grow in the midst of these times? So this is also something that you guys have both brought to my attention from the moment I started here, and really talking about the importance of this in this conversation. So Brian, I was wondering if you could actually bring us a little bit of information or bring us into this a bit more and tell us a little bit more about what is core versus context and why does it matter?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Rena. That's a great intro. And you're right. So the moniker or that tagline, core versus context, isn't new. It's actually been around a while. But it has resurfaced recently, and that's because of exactly the reasons you just called out. So in turbulent times, companies often stop and re-examine how their business is structured and where they can become more efficient. And that's really what core versus context is. So a little background. So core versus context was first articulated in Jeffrey Moore's book, Dealing with Darwin, a few years back. Actually, it's been quite a ways back. So he's a well-known consultant, an author, and what he's really doing here is in his book, he explores how businesses innovate and, more importantly, differentiate themselves from their competition. So that's really the basis for the words core versus context. What he actually states in the book is that when companies stop and look at all the different business functions, what they should be focused on is, again, what differentiates them from the competition. And it makes it hard for the competition to repeat or to become more like them. And it's things like innovation and bringing on more clients. Yeah. That's what makes up the core. And then context is everything else that it takes to support the core, but it's not what the core is. So that's kind of the base level. It's kind of the secret sauce, and it is a management strategy. So that's where it comes from.
Now, are you guys using this in a lot of your conversations today? Yeah.
Yeah, I think both of us are, Ken. I mean, sure, certainly. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we use in conversations, but I don't know that we necessarily always elaborate on the core versus context wording. I mean, a lot of it's just kind of you're having a conversation about it without using the actual words per se, from that perspective. And to your point, Rana, earlier, is when you start talking about all the changes, and this even goes into the job market, whereas a few years ago, when you would put out job ads, you would have resumes upon resumes and you'd have a lot of qualified. But now the way that the job market is gone, where you have it's harder to get the right talent. So that even more adds to the core versus context when you're talking about it, because there may have been functions that you would have had somebody on staff that would have handled previously. But now as you go through it, it's a lot harder to define those skill sets. That's when you take a look at it and say, okay, do we really need to hire this skill set, or is this something we could partner with somebody else and they could handle it, or we could have somebody here where they take a portion of it and then we have an added partner that would take, a bigger percentage of. So kind of to add to that with the job market adds to this whole slide as well.
Yeah, well, that's a really, really great point. I know that a lot of organizations could probably really benefit from this, especially since they're probably already having the conversations, that they just don't know it, like you mentioned. So I wanted to share my screen. I know that there has been a visual that's been created, and I was wondering, Ken, if you could walk us through it. So let me pop this up and share this a bit more. Can you see that?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep, sure.
So this is something that I know we've created to kind of explain this a bit more and really walk through it. So can you walk us through this?
Yeah, so if you look at your top left, which is your core critical, I'll use some examples here. So let's just say you're a manufacturing company. That area in the top left is your product or your special product. What makes you different? There's a lot of things that go inside a manufacturing organization, for instance, that makes their product offering different than others. That the people within their organization are who work on that product and who make that product what it is. So that's where, typically speaking, that's where they stick with their own internal side of things to work, to have their individuals work on that portion of the business. So if we slide down to context critical, this is the area where it's got to be done, obviously, to support the business, but it's one of those questions where does it require somebody inside of my business to handle it? It may be something more along the lines of, somebody helping out or being able to offload a portion of that. But it's, again, one of those things that it's a must do to make sure that, we can keep producing. Example would be, let's say manufacturing again. The machines on the floor that are required to produce, like a lot of those places have maintenance people on staff, but then they depend on maintenance contracts and such of the manufacturers of the devices or the machines to help them through where it's not the day-to-day type fixes.
That makes sense.
So then if we talk about the core support portion of it, that's where you look at things that there's items that need to be done. They don't necessarily add to what you do as far as the core. But if you can't handle it, or if it's not done appropriately, it could be devastating to the business. Again, and in this case, they use logistics for the statement there. Now, a lot of companies, they work through, they generate their product, they get everything squared away, but they don't own their own trucks that get it down the road. Yeah. So, but if the logistics side of things, if the trucking companies out there aren't able to get their product from point A to point B, obviously that's a detriment to their organization. Yeah. So then we go down to context support. So I'll use at that same manufacturing plant, do they mow their own grass? Most of the businesses that we deal with, obviously in the business side of things, don't go out. You don't see somebody from that company out mowing the grass or edging or doing their flower beds. That's where they're always contracting out, because that's not something that necessarily has to be done within their business. Yeah. So if you look at it, when you look at a full business portfolio, whether it's accounting services, there's places where co-source makes a lot of sense. We deal a lot in the small to medium-sized business where there's a lot of companies that don't necessarily have a dedicated HR person because of their size. Yeah. And that's where like HR outsourcing, having somebody that can kind of come out and help that. Obviously, from the IT perspective, there's a lot of different solution sets there. We have a lot of customers that maybe have a staff and they are supporting their ERP or their primary software system, but the hardware systems and that around and the maintenance is something that we've come in and we've kind of co-sourced with them. So there's a lot of different variations of it, and through a lot of different areas of the prospective businesses.
That's a really good point.
Yep.
Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, it's a little bit of a mind meld. We joke about that all the time, right? And we laugh about it because it can be, it kind of sounds like, or it looks like it could be complex, but it's really not. It's really a great management and leadership tool or thought, because it is a management and leadership tool to look at their business and then look at how things are done or what's necessary to sustain the business. And when you get used to just thinking through this at the leadership level, it really boils down to a pretty simple formula. If you focus on the core, this is what is the distinction that makes you unique, right? It's what keeps you in business. What's your secret sauce? All the other buckets or quadrants are contextual. Those are things that probably could be better performed and help support the core through co-source, partnerships, or even outsourcing. So when you have that discussion, it's a really engaging discussion to have with leadership as they're thinking about maybe launching new products or gaining market share. Doesn't matter what it is, what business it is. We like to break it down internally as everything is a widget, right? That's a great technical term.
Yeah.
But when you think about that, it's great for leadership to kind of go through that exercise and think about core versus context, and it really does help structure the business. So it's really an engaging, and it's not tough. It's a little bit of a just mind shift as you think about it in the way that it's laid out here.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to stop share, but we'll make this available.
Yeah.
You know, as we think about these leaders, I know you mentioned that this is a really great tool for leadership. What would be the first step for leaders or for organizations to take when they want to take a deeper look at core versus context within the organization?
I would say, I mean, ultimately looking at, like Brian said, you know what your core of your business is. You know what is your specialty of why clients utilize you. But looking outside of that and looking at each different business process and figuring out, does it make sense to have this? Are we set up in a proper fashion today to have this fully internal? Brian made a good point earlier today when we were discussing, look at the cloud today and look at how many people are moving to the cloud. And what is that indirectly, it kind of relates to our slide here again, in that there's a lot of people that are saying, wow, do I really want to have to deal with maintaining hardware and doing all these different things?
Yeah.
They're looking at the core of their business. And so when you look at the context of it, that's like, in a lot of cases, it doesn't matter necessarily where their hardware or where the production systems sit from an IT perspective. They can move that out, and then they don't have to deal with rooms that are locked and cooled and everything along those lines. So even in that sense, it's not an individual, it's more of a process or a thing per se. But that's where you kind of move down the cycle, is when you start looking at each individual thing within the organization from a process perspective and say, okay, is this the right decision for today for us to keep longevity going and to keep our business moving in the right direction? And from a profitability perspective, what makes the most sense? What made the most sense 5 years ago to have it fully in-house and handling it and having somebody doing that as their primary job, in some cases changes dramatically over a 5-year period and should be looked at. So that's one of the things that we've seen, especially because we're in the IT side. It's a very fast changing industry. We see that a lot. What was best practices 5 years ago is not best practices today, and probably won't be best practices 5 years from now.
Yeah. Well, even if you look at the world today, or think 5 years ago, COVID didn't exist,
Right.
you know, and now we're still living in the midst of it to a point, and the amount of change And I know a lot of companies use the word pivot over the years. They've had to pivot and completely change due to, this scenario, this disruption. And it's still, there's still more change coming down the line. I mean, I know that there's stats out there that it's only going to increase, especially with the staffing issues, and supply chain issues aren't necessarily going away overnight. And depending on how things roll out overseas, we don't know what's going to happen. And, organizations are going to have to continue to evolve at an even faster pace. So the acceleration of change, I think, is also happening even faster than it ever has, even from 5 years ago. So it's a really good point.
Can I just jump on that too? Rena, you made a great point, and you used a key word, pivot. I know it's one of those words that came up during the last few years, but pivot is really what core versus context is, right? Because what it's doing is, since it's a management leadership tool that's strategy based, leadership came together and decided to move into a direction, right? And when they made those decisions to move into a direction, new product line, new service line, maybe maybe reallocate resources, they're making leadership decisions. The concept of core versus context is being applied here, right? What's our core today? What is it going to be? And then how do we allocate the resources or the other buckets to support this move? So pivot kind of works directly right into that piece. And it is what the world is today. And it's not any particular vertical or industry. We're going through it dynamically. You asked earlier, when is a great time to do this? So if you think about normal business cycles, usually you think about budgeting. You think about the time where you're setting the goals for the year, all the way across the board for all your different business units, all your different lines, whatever you're going to do or what you're going to achieve. It's a great time to have, if you have a relationship with someone where you can sit down with the leadership team and uncover this or unpack this a little bit, it might fundamentally change their business, because it'll drive budget. It'll drive headcount, to Ken's point earlier about how are we going to staff for this? Maybe we want to launch a new line, but we've got to find headcount. Well, we all know that's tough today. Maybe it makes more sense for that to be done on a co-source or a partnership basis. So start of the year is a great time. Budgeting, getting in front of those business unit, those managers, and letting them think through their teams and what they're doing, and maybe think about how to allocate their budget to be most impactful to accomplish the core of the business. It's a great time to have that exercise. And it's a great time to use someone to maybe introduce it or come alongside and help the leadership as they evolve through this. These are all great exercises and great conversations.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I found over the past few years, especially say the last 2 years, is the phrase that's how we've always done it has probably dried up quite a bit more, because doing this for 20 some years, I would hear that a lot. Oh yeah, that's just the way we've always done it. And, it was kind of an old school mentality. Yeah, well, it's not broke. Why would we try to fix it? Well, now the whole game has changed in the last couple of years, and in looking at all that, probably if somebody's saying that's the way we've always done it, they've probably had a pretty big hit in their business, because very few companies that we work with that I know of didn't make some sort of pretty good percentage of a change in certain areas to work through some of the recent times. And I'm guessing if there are people that didn't, that they probably suffered from it. So it is kind of, I wouldn't say comical, but it's a different landscape today than it was before. And even when I look at all the things that are going on in the world, there's a lot of stuff now where security and conversations around security are totally different than what they were 5 years ago. It wasn't a hot topic back then as much as it is today. And now with everything that's going on overseas, there are people that are using that whole climate over there to exploit others over here. So it's a whole different area, and starting to talk about security. And of a lot of the clients that we work with, they don't have that security expertise on staff. And again, that's where it comes to whether we co-source or outsource, or we do some of those things for them. So just kind of giving some different examples of where I see it in the day-to-day business today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I actually love that you said the phrase, this is how we've always done it, and how that's significantly changed. And just through our conversation, something that's kind of come up in my mind is this idea of what was the barrier on why people potentially even said that this is how we've always done it. And potentially, you know, this is an assumption here, is it fear of that they were going to steer away from their mission and vision? But now when I look at core versus context, it's almost an exercise and a tool to help continue to allow your mission and vision to thrive, to make sure that you're still serving that core and working towards that mission and vision. And so I know as like organizational leaders, think about that. And that really is the heart of who they are and why they function on a daily basis. I think this exercise and this tool allows you to continue to elevate your mission and vision, but also then allow it to thrive through focusing on that core. And so I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but as our conversation was happening, it was one of those things where I'm like, what are like barriers potentially, you know, and this is how we've always done it is potentially that barrier, or it's, we don't want to move away from the mission and vision of who we are. You know, changing some of these things doesn't move away from the mission and vision, but it's only going to elevate it if we actually take a deeper look, analyze, and get back to the core of what we're supposed to do and how we serve our clients and our customers. So
great summary.
Absolutely.
wow,
And
awesome.
I just great summary. And in today's environment, I'll just add that is becoming the new norm, because now we have to be more nimble. We have to quickly pivot, quicker than businesses ever have before. So the speed of business has escalated over the years, right? And the challenge every single day for leadership is, how do we get to market faster? How do we gain more share? How do we provide better service? And so this is actually being practiced, right? But now at a much accelerated pace. But that was a great summary, Rena. That was really, it was spot on.
Awesome. Well, thank you for explaining everything so well, because it, you know, came from our conversation. So, well, awesome. Do you guys have any last words of advice or like next steps that you would suggest people to take if they wanted to, like maybe like one sentence? So what should you do as soon as you get off watching this? Any suggestions there?
Assess where you're at today.
Right.
Be realistic. Because it's the way you've always done it is not probably the right answer. You need to really look at each of those areas and assess, am I in the right position for the long haul?
Yeah, all that.
Challenge yourself, and don't be afraid at the leadership level to bring it forward, to take a look, right? You have, that's really it. I mean, it's all about, in case, especially if you're culturally that sort of a firm, bring it forward. Bring this strategy forward, challenge your coworkers and leaders, and see what the possibilities are for your business.
Love it. I also love it too, because I think that this isn't something that has to be, this can also be high level organizationally, but now I'm also thinking, I think this is something from, if you're a manager over a team, this is something that can go back to the mission and vision of what are you trying to do? What are you producing as a department? And also can be something that I think can be used at a team level potentially as well as an exercise. So something I'm taking away, and you know, I know that something I've been challenged with is looking at how can we differentiate, and this is the tool. This is a tool to help do that. So I appreciate you guys spending the time with me today on our Empowered Chat and talking through this, because it can be powerful. I think it's something that's lasting. It's not going to be something that's going to be irrelevant tomorrow, because this is something that's been around for years and it's going to help you evolve. So appreciate your thoughts, appreciate your time. And until next time, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Rena.
Yep. Thanks everybody. Take care.